Not really.
Yeah.
Really have
Pretty good.
Well, that's how they say that means surprise. Oh, Was that fun? That's my feel.
Also.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Good morning. Roger, would you start us off with a word of prayer?
Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Father, thank you for this time to speak together, study a lesson from your word. We be the teacher this morning that you may present it in such a way that we can all understand easily. That you go with us, forgive all our sins. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen.
Okay, let's everyone open up our Bibles. Matthew chapter 8. Continuing on, we're going to start reading here in verse 28. We had quite a bit of comments and discussion from verses 23 through 27 on Wednesday. It was a good class. Didn't get near as far as Chris expected, of course. That was good to have all those comments. This morning I'm going to do something a little different. There's three parallel passages. There's three passages here that talks about Jesus in these verses that what we're going to read about in Matthew chapter 8. We're going to read each one of them. Then we're going to start discussing them, and I'm going to ask you questions and see if you were paying attention to what you read. Instead of me doing all the talking, I'm going to let you guys do some of the talking.
the answer.
I may not like the answers, but we'll see how it goes. See how good your memory is. I know mine's not very good, so it might be awful quiet in here. I don't know. But, okay, so we'll read all three of these and then we'll come back. We'll just talk about them and see. And I'm sure there's going to be several things that Chris is going to want to discuss still again on Wednesday. But we'll start off this morning, Matthew chapter 8. We're going to read verses 28, Matthew 8, 28 through 34. And like I said, as we go through and read these, keep your fingers on each of these three so we can kind of refer back and forth to them. Matthew 8, verses 28 through 34. And Jerry, would you read those?
And when it came to the other side of the country of Gerson, he met two opposed with the devil coming with out of the tomb, proceeding first, so that no man mighty pass by any way.
'28 through 34.
Oh, that part I didn't hear.
That's not a good start, Jerry. Go ahead.
And behold, they cried out, saying, we have to do with thee, Jesus, Son of God. Art thou that come hither to torture us before the time? There was a good way off from the herd of the swine. And he said unto them, Go. And they come out and then went into the herd of the swine. And behold, the whole herd of swine ran violently down to a steep place in the sea and perished in the water. And they had kept them from fleet, and it went their way into the city. And told everything that was fallen into the possession of the devil. And behold, the whole city came out to meet Jesus. And when they saw him, they brought beside him that they would depart of the coast.
Okay. Now let's turn over to Mark chapter 5. We actually get quite a few more details in Mark and Luke's accounts. Mark chapter 5 is kind of a lengthy reading, it's 1 through 17. So we'll break it up a little bit. Carl, would you read the first 10 verses, and then Katie, would you read 11 through 17?
Chapter 5.
Chapter 5.
And they came over into the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gadarenes. And when he was come out of the ship, immediately they met him out of the tombs, a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, no, not with chains, because that he had been often bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces. Neither could any man tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshipped him and cried with a loud voice and said, What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee by God that thou torment me not. And he said unto him, Come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. And he asked him, What is thy name? And he answered, My name is Legion, for we are many. He besought him much that he will not send them away out of the country.
Now a large herd of swine was feeding there near the mountains. So all the demons begged him, saying, Send us into the swine that we may enter them. And at once Jesus gave them permission. Then the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine. There were about 2,000. And the herd ran violently down the steep place to the sea and drowned in the sea. So those who fed the swine fled and told it in the city and in the country. And they went out to see what it was that had happened. Then they came to Jesus and saw the one who had been demon-possessed and had legion sitting and clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who saw it told them how it happened to him who had been demon-possessed and about the swine. Then they began to plead with him to depart from the region.
Okay, you can see we got a lot more details here in Mark's version than we did in Matthew's. Okay, now let's flip over to Luke chapter 8. Hope you're paying attention. There'll be questions. Luke chapter 8, and we're going to read verses 26 through 37. Luke 8, 26 through 37. And Chuck, would you read those?
And they sailed to the country of Gadarenes, which is opposite Galilee. And when he stepped out on the land, there met him a certain man from the city who had demons for a long time. And he wore no clothes, nor did he live in a house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out, fell down before him, and with a loud voice said, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For he had commanded the unclean spirits to come out of the man, for it had often seized him, and he was kept under guard, bound with chains and shackles. And he broke the bonds and was driven by the demons into the wilderness. Jesus asked him, saying, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion, because many demons have entered me." And they begged him that he would not command them to go out of the abyss. Now I heard of many swine feeding there on the mountain. So he begged him that he would permit them to enter them, and he permitted them. Then the demons went out of the man and entered the swine. And the herd ran violently down the steep place into the lake and drowned. When those who fed them saw what had happened, they fled and told it to the city and in the country. And when they went out to see what had happened, and came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had departed, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed in his right mind, and they were afraid. They also, who seen it, told them by that means he who had been demon possessed was healed.
Yeah, one more.
Then the whole multitude of the surrounding region of the Gadarenes asked him to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear. He got into a boat and returned.
Okay. In Matthew, we discussed that Jesus had decided to, I'm looking for the verse and can't find it. He decided to go to it says he decided to go to the other side. And verse 23, he got into a boat. And here we have in verse 28, he comes to the other side. So they go across the Sea of Galilee. Mark's version says the other side of the sea. And Luke's version says they sailed to. So we know that he got into a boat because we just read about him and the storm that came up and him calming the seas and calming the storm. So they sailed from Capernaum over to where they're going to. And they get to the other side. And when they get to the other side, Matthew says they came to the country of the Gergesenes. You might know where that is.
On the other side of the Sea of Galilee.
That's right. It's on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. That wasn't a very hard question, was it? If you have any of those maps that I printed out several weeks back, we're going to refer to it a little bit here. Does everyone see where the Sea of Galilee is?
That's the top.
You can see right next to the Sea of Galilee, towards the top, there it says Capernaum. And then you look over to the right a little bit, you can see Gergesa, it says. Okay. That's a city there, right next to the Sea of Galilee. And that's where they think this was, the city of Gergesa. So that's why it's called the country of the Gergesenes. Those that lived in Gergesa would be called Gergesenes. So they took a boat from Capernaum over here to Gergesa. But how are they referred to in Mark and Luke, these people? Where did Jesus go? What's it described as? Gadarenes, right? So is this two different places, or anybody know?
Just referencing, there were two different, there was another, can't remember, it was like two different, they were referred to by two different names, but it was the same area.
Right. If you look back at the map again, if you go a little further south, just a little bit, there's a town called Gerasa on the map. That's incorrect. When I printed this, I didn't know that, but as I was studying for class, I found that out. If you look a little further down below where it says Decapolis and it says Gadara, and there's a question mark, those two cities should be switched. All the maps I've seen online after I printed this, those two cities on this map are incorrect. So Gadara should be up there where it says Gerasa. Gerasa should be down south. So Gadara is up closer to the Sea of Galilee. And, well, I had some notes here I was going to read. As far as Gergesa, midway between the north and south ends of the lake, directly east across the lake from Magdala, which you can see if you look at the map, you see Magdala, and right straight across is Gergesa. The sides of the mountain near the ruins of Gergesa are studded with natural and artificial caves, which were used as tombs, and we read about that. And Gergesa was a little-known small village. So it's a little small village there, and that's where Jesus sailed to, and that's where this happens. But as far as Gadara, which on that map says Gerasa, which is incorrect, it says online, some 16 miles away into the southeast and 7 miles back from the lake was the well-known city of Gadara. The region is properly called Country of the Gadarenes, for Gadara was an important city, and the stamp of a ship on its coins suggests that its territory extended to the Lake of Galilee. There is evidence that Gadara had control over land bordering the lake. Jewish historian Josephus mentions this. And then Gadara was a much larger, well-known city. It was considered the chief city of the area, and Josephus called it the capital of Perea. So it was kind of like the capital of that area, and they actually had control all the way to the Sea of Galilee. So both of these are true. They went to the city of Gergesa, but the city of Gadara was also in control of a region there. They were the chief city. So the Gadarenes, both of those terms are correct. They went to the city of Gergesa, but it was in control of the Gadarenes also. It's what I could find out. You know, Chris might know more about it, and he might tell you more Wednesday. I don't know, or maybe he's going to tell us more today. But from what I could see, that's what they said. These two cities were, Gadara was the principal city there, and that's why, in a way, it was called the country of the Gadarenes, because they were the one in kind of control. Yeah, Chris.
Yes, as in Luke chapter 8, verse 34, when those who been there saw what had happened, they fled and told it in the city and in the country. And so that was a description of that local city and the region that the city controlled.
Right.
The general area as the city.
Right. Okay, so there's one reason why it says that the Gadarenes and the Gergesenes, and both are correct. They went to the city of Gergesa, and that's where they landed. Apologize about the map. I didn't know it was incorrect. What I was looking at before, it looked like everything was right, but when I studied for class this morning, I was like, oops, that doesn't look right. I should have probably printed some more, but anyway. So he sails across the sea and gets to the city of Gergesa. And it says that Luke 8, verse 27 says, when he had stepped out on the land, and Mark 5, verse 2, when he had come out of the boat. So they just barely get there. And when they come out of the boat, immediately. So they just barely get to the land, and Jesus steps out of the boat, and what happens? Huh?
Man comes out.
Well, actually, two men. Matthew 8:28, there met him two men, right? Now we know Mark and Luke only talk about one of them, but there was two men. So Matthew 8:28, he just barely gets off the boat. And here comes these two men. Immediately, it says. So, and what is there something special about these two men? Why are we being told this story? They were crazy? Well,
And they recognize the authority of Christ.
there's a lot of things here, isn't there? I'm sure Chris is going to discuss this some more, and we're not going to be able to get through everything, but there's a lot of stuff to discuss in this being talked about. But Matthew 8:28 says there met him two demon-possessed men. Verse 33 refers to the same thing, demon-possessed. Okay? And then Matthew 8:31, Mark 5, verse 12, Luke 8, verse 27, 29, 30, 33, and 35 all refer to demons. Okay? So these men had demons. Look at Mark chapter 5 and verse 2 and see how they're described. We know they're demons possessed and demons. How are they described in Mark? They had an unclean spirit, unclean or impure. So he had the same thing, demons, and he had an unclean spirit. It's talking about the same thing. And these two men come rushing up from where? Yeah, they were in the tombs. It says it was out of the tombs. And Mark 8:28 and Mark 5 verse 2, they came out of the tombs. But they didn't just happen to be in the tombs, or why would they? That's where they lived. Of course, you read it so many times you probably remember. But yeah, Mark 5 verse 3 and Luke 8:27, they didn't live. He didn't live in the city, or they actually lived in the tombs. So they came out of the tombs. That's where they were living at the time. And Luke 8:27 says this man came from the city. So they were near a city. We know it was Gergesa, but he's close to a city, and he was living in the tombs. And we know from all three versions that when Jesus does this miracle, that the people that have seen it happen, they all go into the city. So they were just outside of the city, Gergesa. And that's where these men were living, in the tombs. So again, the fact that you wouldn't have to be told that they were demon possessed and know there was something a little bit wrong with them if they were living in the tombs in the first place, would you? But what does it mean, the term demon? What does it mean? What is a demon?
Evil spirit.
Well, an unclean spirit, this evil spirit, yeah. Are they the devil's angels? Exactly what would you call them? Carl?
Yeah, and it's curious because we studied in James, and this break is brought out here. We're talking about somebody that believed in James 2:19. He says, you believe there's one God, you're doing well. The devils also believe and tremble. Now this is an instance, they recognize here's Jesus, the Son of God. They do that. The people wouldn't accept that.
Right.
The devils knew, and they crippled.
How sad is that, huh? Okay, so the demon, yeah, what do you want to call it? The devil's angels, but these are people that didn't do good things, did they? We're going to talk about what it did to this man and how he acted because he was demon possessed. But it wasn't a good thing. Yeah, Dad.
You know, like in Mark 6 there, it said when they saw Jesus far off, they ran and worshiped him. So they wasn't like, oh, is that Jesus? And, they knew who he was as far as they could see him. They run and worshiped him. So there wasn't no doubt, like, is this Jesus? They knew he was. And it stated so that he was the Son of God.
Right. Absolutely. How long had this man been demon possessed, or men?
Well, they said for a long time.
Long time. That's right. In Luke, it says a long time. And it's plural, demons. When you read all these versions, it says demons. If you look at Mark and Luke, it says many demons. Okay, it doesn't say, I'm not sure how many. There is something I'm going to refer to here in a minute, but we know he had many. It was more than one, multiple demons. Yeah, Richard.
It says legions, and that's a large group, like 100 or so type of individuals. Isn't that a legion?
Legion, I think, was 6,000 soldiers, right? I don't know if there was 6,000, but yeah, his name was, he called himself Legion. Yes, Roger?
We went into 2,000 pigs.
That's where I was going to look next. If you look at Mark chapter 5, verse 13, the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine. There were about 2,000. When I kind of first read that, I thought maybe that meant 2,000 demons, but I think this is talking about the swine, right? So they went out and they entered 2,000 of the pigs. So anyway, there was a lot of them. So we have these two demon-possessed men meet Jesus right as he steps off the boat, and they're demon-possessed. And as we already discussed, we'll discuss it more deeply here in a minute, but they knew exactly who Jesus was. These demon-possessed men, how are they described here in these verses?
They were naked and they used themselves, cut themselves. They weren't pretty looking.
Purdy looking? Did I see that somewhere? Purdy looking. I don't know if I saw that. Yes, John.
They're also described like in Mark, just how they weren't able to be contained, had been often bound with fetters and chains had been plucked, fetters broken into pieces, neither could any man tame him.
Right.
I'll tell you that. So I mean, it also lets you know not only what they were doing to themselves, but how out of control they were to other people around them. You know, letting it be known also that the people there were aware of their illness or what was going on with them, and kind of let them be.
Well, they kind of had no choice. Okay, yeah. In Matthew, it says they were exceedingly fierce. Not just fierce, exceedingly fierce. Try to hold your place where you're at, but flip over a couple of chapters in Matthew to chapter 2. Matthew chapter 2 and verse 16. And Polly, would you read that?
And Herod, when he saw that he was deceived by the wise men, was exceedingly angry. And he sent forth and put to death all the male children who were in Bethlehem and in all its districts, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the wise men.
Okay, just the word exceedingly here is the same Greek word that we read, exceedingly fierce, in Matthew 8. Here in Matthew 2, we see that Herod was exceedingly angry. He was very angry that the wise men didn't come back and tell him where Jesus was. Now let's look at one more verse, Mark chapter 9 and verse 3. This is the transfiguration, but Mark 9 and verse 3. And Joshua, would you read that? Verse 3.
And after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up on a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them.
And verse 3.
His clothes became shining, exceedingly white like snow, such as no longer on earth can white.
Okay, talking about Jesus, it says his clothes here, that his clothes were shining exceedingly white like snow, such as no launder on earth could whiten them. So you can see exceedingly, that means extremely, very, we know what that means, but these men were described as not just fierce, but exceedingly fierce. Of course, fierce gives it a connotation of savage or dangerous. These men could be dangerous. They were dangerous to themselves and could be dangerous to others. Let's turn over to 2 Timothy chapter 3 and read verse 1. And Chris, would you read that?
2 Timothy 3:1. But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy.
Okay, here in verse 1, it says perilous times. This is the same Greek word that we read about fierce, or in Matthew and Mark and Luke. So you can see what perilous or dangerous. So these men were not just dangerous or fierce, savage, they were extremely. So that must have been, as was already referred to, that must have been very scary for the people that were living in that city, knowing these two men were living out there in the tombs, right? Such as it says that, I can't find it in my notes, but in Matthew it says, so that no one could pass that way. They were out there in the tombs, and it doesn't say wouldn't pass by, it says couldn't. No one could pass that way. These men kept people from coming through there. And so that's how savage and fierce they were. And maybe that's why we don't know for sure whether they started running to Jesus for that purpose or they immediately recognized him as the Son of God. We don't know, but we know that immediately they came upon him. So these two very fierce men come running up. Yeah, Dad, you got a comment?
Yeah, it looks like it said they lived in the tombs out there, by the tombs, and like you were saying, you couldn't pass that away. They were violent people. But you can presume from reading that, the people in the city had run them out of the city. And that was the only place they could find to live if people wasn't pursuing them. But they wouldn't let people pass by. They would rob them. You can just use your imagination. What would happen if people that tried to pass by that?
Well, as Richard already referred to, in Luke's version, it says he wore no clothes. And then in Luke and Mark, it says that when the demon seized him, which it says it happened often, they tried to keep him under guard. And it says that they bound him with chains and shackles. So basically they arrested him, right? If he was living in the city and all this happened, and when he did what he did, they tried to control him and they couldn't control him. So they bound him with chains and shackles. They basically arrested him. And what happened? In Luke, it says he broke the bonds and went into the wilderness. So he broke them and took off. Mark's version said he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and they were pulled apart. The chains actually were pulled apart by him, and the shackles broke in pieces. So this guy was very scary and intimidating person to be that way, to have this kind of strength. And has already been referred to in Mark's version, it says, neither could anyone tame him. They couldn't restrain him. They couldn't control him. He was just completely out of control while all this was going on. And the word tame in Mark is also the same Greek word that we read about James, where we can't tame the tongue. So you can see what it means is to restrain or control. They could not control this man. And then also in Mark chapter 5 and verse 5, it says, always, night and day, in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. So he was yelling and screaming, cutting himself with stones, hurting himself. This guy had a lot of problems, didn't he? Because of all these demon possessed. And again, how was that for the townspeople, knowing that those two men were out there in those tombs just outside your city and all this was going on? So these two men that was acting like this, and this is the kind of behavior they had, these are the two men that come rushing up to Jesus just as he steps off the boat. And these two exceedingly fierce men that have the strength that could pull chains apart, what did they do?
They worshiped him.
What Dad already brought up. They come up to him and worshiped him. They knew who Jesus was. Mark chapter 5 and verse 6 says exactly that. When he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshiped him. So these people were so violent, so fierce that people wouldn't even come that way. And they rush up to Jesus and they worship him. If you look at Luke 8:28, it says he fell down before Jesus. So I don't know if he bowed down or kneeled down, but he worshiped Jesus and bowed down before him. So if there were some people there, we know there were some people there that seen this happen. So they're probably thinking, uh-oh, look at these guys are rushing up to this boat, and they're thinking something bad's going to happen. And then they kneel down or bend down and worship the guy. What were these people thinking? Yeah, the demons knew exactly who Jesus was. Exactly, yes. Richard?
The demons definitely knew the power that Jesus had. And Jesus has definitely more power over the demons. And the demons would not even stand a chance against Christ, you know, so.
Right. Well, after they worship him, what do they say to Jesus? I mean, they worship him, but what do they say?
Son of Matthew, or
Any of the versions, what do they say here to Jesus?
have you come to join me?
Yeah, well, first, how do they describe Jesus?
The Son of the Most High God.
Son of God. Jesus, Matthew says Jesus, Son of God. Mark and Luke both say Jesus, Son of the Most High God. Yes, these demons, which were many, knew exactly who Jesus was and call him the Son of God. And we're going to get, well, I don't know if we're going to have time. Maybe Chris can get into it, but we have many verses that show that the demons knew who Jesus was. These guys, all these demons, they come rushing up, and these two men come rushing up to Jesus, and they say, Jesus, the Son of God. They believed and confessed that Jesus was the Son of God. Now, we have a lot of people that say, if you believe in your heart and accept him and confess, you're saved. Well, here the devils believed and they confessed. Were they saved? No, they're siding with the devil, aren't they? They're on his side. They're trying to do things wrong.
And they asked
Believing
to have
and
the
confessing isn't enough.
They asked to have the judgment postponed.
And they were worried about what Jesus could do to them. I don't think we're going to have time to get to that. There's a whole section here that we can talk about. They knew his authority. They didn't try to do anything to Jesus. I'm sure Chris can cover this on Wednesday because there's a few verses I want to read here in the next few minutes, but they definitely didn't try to intimidate him. They begged him. They stepped back. They recognized and knew his authority and that they couldn't do anything with Jesus. They weren't even going to try. Yes, Bob, go ahead.
Matthew 8:29. They asked the question, art thou come hither to torment us before the time? They knew they're going to be tormented and the time's coming. And the question, are you coming to do that right now?
Yes.
We know we got to come.
Right. Maybe that's why they rushed up here so quick. Is it the time already? Let's turn over to Mark chapter 1 and read a couple of verses here. Mark chapter 1, we're going to read verses 23 and 24. And Lois, would you read those?
I'm sorry, Mark 1, what?
23 and 24?
And there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, saying, Let us alone. What have we to do with thee, thou Jesus of Nazareth? Art thou come to destroy us? I know thee, who thou art, the Holy One of God.
Okay, here's another case. He's called with an unclean spirit and knew exactly who Jesus was. Jesus of Nazareth, the Holy One of God. They knew. The demons knew. And then also in the same chapter, in verse 34, we have another example. Mark chapter 1, verse 34. John, you want to read that?
And he healed many who were ill with various diseases and cast out many demons. He is not permitting the demons to speak because he knew who he was.
Right. He didn't want that out at the time. The demons knew exactly who Jesus was. And let's flip over to Luke chapter 4. Luke chapter 4, verses 33 through 35. And Melody, would you read those?
And in the synagogue there was a man which had a spirit of an unclean devil, and cried out with a loud voice, saying, Let us alone. What have we to do with thee, thou Jesus of Nazareth? Are you come to destroy us? I know thee who thou art, the Holy One of God.
Okay, and then we won't take time to read it, but in verse 41, later on, he's still keep getting demons out of people, and it says they cried out, You are the Christ, the Son of God. So these demons knew who he was, and immediately. And you can see that they have respect for his authority. They don't try to do anything to Jesus. They always ask him or plead, or and I'm sure Chris will get to this on Wednesday. But interestingly enough, when Jesus was tempted by the devil in Matthew chapter 4, what did the devil say? Did the devil say, "You're the Son of God"? What did he do when he was tempting him? Michelle?
He said, "It is the Lord."
Right. I just found that interesting in Matthew 4, verse 3 and verse 6. When Satan was tempting Jesus in the wilderness, he said, "If you are the Son of God." Well, we know that he knew who Jesus was, but again, just kind of, I don't know, trying to agitate Jesus maybe, because the demons, his angels, knew exactly who Jesus was, but the devil himself, "If you are the Son of God." I thought that was interesting. And yes, ma'am.
Is it that they didn't want, I mean, he didn't want them to say who he was to people because he wanted them to go according to what the prophets and scripture had taught them before?
Well, there was a lot of things. This is early on, and he was wanting to, I think he was wanting to try to keep the multitudes down somewhat so he could try to teach. If they went out and spreading everywhere, all these people would come to him, but also, yeah, it was prophesied that so I think both are true. That's why he didn't want them to go out and speaking at the time. Later on, he did. When he came into Jerusalem on a donkey, Hosanna, and they were all praising him, he allowed that to happen. So there was, depending on where he was at the time, preaching and where he was starting, that's changed. Just real quickly, in Acts chapter 19, we see some men here that actually tried to kick out some demons without God's authority, and they got beat up and run out of town because they didn't do it according to God or with God's authority. So Jesus and the apostles were able to do that because God was with them. If we don't do it with God, then we're all alone and we're not going to be able to do it. These demons overpowered these men in Acts chapter 19. Anyway, thanks for the comments. I'm sure Chris has more he wants to discuss on Wednesday.
Are you sure somewhere in that verse it didn't say it was pretty?
Well, he's cutting himself up with stones.
It did look pretty, didn't it?
Hi.